Are you putting together a red team and wondering how to divide duties in a way that works? Are you wondering who should be responsible for what? Look no further. This is the first video in a series on red team roles and responsibilities. As you build or grow your team, having clearly defined roles and responsibilities is vital to keeping your team functioning properly. When team members don't know what they're responsible for or what they can and can't do, you'll find tons of issues like duplication of efforts, abandoned projects, incomplete or completely unassigned tasks, and major operational risks that could put your team's future in jeopardy. As I discussed in a previous video, a red team has 4 primary roles: your on-keyboard personnel, support personnel, developers, and management. Your team may or may not have people filling all of these roles depending on the size and maturity of your team, or you may find that your structure is significantly different, and that's fine. But these are the most common 4 roles that I find across red teams. Today we're just focused on the first, the on-keyboard personnel. I guess I'll just call them hackers, even though I hate that word. But these are the people actually performing your hands-on engagements. So what are your hackers responsible for, and what should they be doing both on and off engagement? Let's find out. Before any engagement, of course, your hackers are responsible for familiarizing themselves with the ROEs and the scope of the engagement. This is a critical component that comes before anything else can be done. They need to know the rules so that they know what they are and are not allowed to do once they get on that keyboard. Remember that any mistake from one of these personnel could have severe side effects and consequences to both continuity of operations for the business and the continuity of your team at all. Related to that, and informed by the ROE and scope, they need to be planning their engagement activities. It's best if your personnel don't come in day to day not knowing what they're going to do. It's best if they have a plan that lines up with the rules they're supposed to be following that drives towards the objective every day. This keeps your team on tasks so that their time is spent as well as it can be, and that you know you're minimizing any risks of having side effects on the target environment. Now, this planning doesn't need to be super formal. They can have just text documents, some chats with other personnel so they kind of have an idea of what they're doing, but it can also be a pretty detailed plan as long as there's some guideline in place so that your staff knows what they're supposed to be doing on any given day during an engagement. A lot of personnel view this as unnecessary overhead, but it's actually very important, and the importance of this needs to be stressed to the workforce so that they really understand why this is a critical component in their workflow. Logically moving on from the planning phase is actually performing the engagements. This is obviously what your on-keyboard personnel are really here for. They need to affect the target environment in a way that leads towards the necessary or desired objectives of the engagement. While they're performing the engagement, however, there are subcomponents or sub-responsibilities that are important for them to keep in mind while they're working. First of these, taking very detailed notes. Your on-keyboard personnel need to be taking a detailed record of everything they do against a target environment. This helps you in multiple ways. One, it can help diagnose when things go wrong. It can help with tracing what steps were taken that got to that point when something went wrong, which will help you limit the scope or impact of anything that might go awry. Second, it helps incredibly with reporting at the end of an engagement. If you have 3 or 4 people on keyboard during an engagement, and then you have to compile a report at the end, having a lack of notes or very disparate note-taking makes putting that report together very difficult, because you might say that we had this effect on the target, but you're not really sure how you got there or what the chain of events was that allowed your team to have that effect. A big part of having the red team engagements is defense at every layer, so that defenders know exactly what changes they need to make to prevent that effect from happening from a real attacker. If you can't fully recreate the attack chain, then you're losing most of the value your team is supposed to be providing. And that's where detailed note-taking comes in. This includes written notes, or I should say typed up notes as they're doing things, screenshots of activities they're performing. Any way you can come up with to record what the on-keyboard personnel are doing will be massively helpful in generating reports and responding to incidents or queries that somebody might have for your team. Next, this is kind of on the flip side of understanding ROEs and scope, is that your on-keyboard personnel need to understand what's going to happen when they hit enter on any command they're running. These engagements are often performed against sensitive environments, places where a company is not going to want to tolerate any downtime or side effects of your team's activities. In fact, the risk of things going wrong is often what prevents leadership from really buying into the whole red teaming practice. So we want to be as careful as possible. To do that, your team needs to be very familiar with their tools. They need to understand the underlying technology and have an intimate knowledge of exactly what's going to happen when they run any given command. They need to know what the intended effect is, what it's going to do to the system, potential side effects, anything like that. The more they know, the better. Now, once your team has performed their engagement, they're going to have all kinds of data to analyze. This could be after the entire engagement is over or just day to day. They'll complete some operation for a few hours and have a bunch of data to look at again to plan their next activity. So a very important part of the on-keyboard personnel's job is to analyze all the data they're seeing in the network, all the data they're bringing back, which will help them understand the target environment, help them plan better for next steps to get towards their objective, and help to identify other potential avenues of attack, which is all useful and should go in the report. All right, moving on from the engagement into what I will call supporting or just other activities. Your on-keyboard personnel are responsible for a lot of things, not just sitting on a keyboard hacking systems. First one is going to be tool training. As I mentioned before, your personnel need to be very familiar with the tools that they're going to be using, and they also need to be able to train others in how to use the tools. The tool set might change from engagement to engagement, or you might have some tools that are common across engagements, depending on your particular needs. Your entire cadre of on-keyboard personnel need to be intimately familiar with these tools, know how to use them, what effects they have, all the same things I said about knowing what happens when you press enter. In addition to understanding the tools, they need to document the tools. This means they need to document basic instructions on how to use the tools, any known impact or side effects the tools might have, any kind of information that would be useful for another person to come reference if they have to use that same tool on a different engagement. You will often not have the same personnel on every engagement and have different tools in each engagement, but you might come back to one in the future. For that reason, it's very important to document the tool set that you're using in any given scenario and as much technical information as you can about those tools. I'll also mention here, it's a great idea to assign one person to just be the leader on a certain tool. They can become the expert on it, train others on it, and document it. And this will greatly reduce any duplication of efforts from other people having to do the exact same research on that tool. Also, before I move on, I want to note this goes for any tool, open source, purchased tools, in-house developed tools. They all need to be thoroughly investigated and documented. And this leads me right into my second point on supporting activities, which is knowledge management. Your on-keyboard personnel play a critical role in managing the knowledge that your team will build up over time. In addition to the tool set that I just discussed, this will also include tactics and procedures that they may use during an engagement. This can be specific to a particular threat that they're emulating, or these can be just in-house research and new techniques that they come up on their own. Having these well-documented tactics and techniques can help your team replicate scenarios when they face the same sort of environment again later on. It also helps with reproducing steps to know what happened in order to be able to report on it or answer questions accurately. The third thing that goes into knowledge management is just general technical information. Your on-keyboard personnel are going to become pretty darn knowledgeable on all kinds of different systems and technologies over the course of their career. And it can be a great time save if they document what they know in some central location that the whole team has access to. So if I need to know some esoteric fact about a certain operating system I'm going up against, I can search our knowledge base and say, oh, this other guy, he already did this, and here was his response to a scenario, or here's how he approached the technology. It saves a ton of time on reproducing efforts in the future. All right, the third category of supporting activities, testing and verification of tools or other development efforts. As I've already said numerous times, your on-keyboard personnel need to know how their tools work and document it thoroughly. But this also means that they need to be involved in the development process or accepting new tools that your devs are coming up with or that might be released in public space and that your team wants to adopt. They need to test that a tool actually works, has the desired effect, and they need to be aware of any other impact it might have or could potentially have on a target environment. They need to verify that it functions in a way that is acceptable and useful for your team. It might be able to get the job done, but it might do so in such an ugly way or such a risky way that it's not appropriate for your operations because your targets are too sensitive. And of course, perform all of this testing and verification in a test environment. Please never put a tool on a target that you have not ran or thoroughly understood before. You never know what it could do, what the side effects could be, and what horrible effect it could have on the environment or for your team if something goes wrong. This task falls to your on-keyboard personnel because they are in the best position to know how a tool should work, what it should be accomplishing, and what impact it should be having on a target. That's why they're the ones responsible for thoroughly testing and vetting any tool that your team wants to adopt or develop. All right, the third and final major category, I'm calling this Know Your Authorities. I already talked about the ROEs and scope, and that can fall in here too, but this is actually a slightly different topic. I'm primarily concerned with responsibilities inside of a team or levels of authority in a team. Any red team is going to be made up of personnel who have varying levels of experience or technical expertise. You might have someone who's been red teaming for 6 months and they're still training up. You might have someone who's been red teaming for over a decade and they really know what they're doing. A team of any significant size or maturity will probably have these, I'll call them senior level staff, and they should be trusted in being able to make riskier decisions than your junior staff. Your junior level personnel need to have very clearly defined limitations beyond which they should be required to consult with a more senior level person to get approval or assistance depending on what they're interested in doing. These boundaries need to be clearly defined in some central location where they can be easily referenced at a moment's notice during an engagement. This also falls into the much larger umbrella of knowledge management that I've already touched on a few times. And there's a lot more that falls under that umbrella, but these are just a few primary elements. So all right, quick review. Your on-keyboard personnel, they need to, during an engagement, familiarize themselves with the ROEs and the scope intimately. They need to plan their activities on a daily basis. They need to, of course, perform the engagement itself according to the criteria set before. Secondly, their supporting activities. They need to conduct tool testing, documentation, and training of other personnel. They need to contribute to knowledge management with both tool information, but also general techniques and procedures. And they need to perform testing and verification of tool development or adoption efforts. Lastly, your on-keyboard personnel need to know their authorities. They need to have clearly defined lanes to swim in, and there should clearly be limitations on what a certain level of person can do, depending on their experience and training and qualifications. All right, so hopefully this gives you a good idea of where to start with defining the responsibilities of your on-keyboard personnel. But this is only the beginning. We still have support personnel, developers, and managers to discuss, and everyone has their own jobs to do. Everyone is going to be responsible for their own tasks, and everyone must accomplish those tasks in order for your team to operate efficiently. So join me in my next video where I'm going to discuss the developer role and what they should be responsible for.